The first thing Elias Mercer noticed was the way the girl held herself, like someone bracing against an invisible wind. She stood at the edge of his pasture just as the sun was bleeding out behind the Wyoming hills, the sky streaked with copper and ash. Dust clung to her skirt, and her boots were worn thin at the soles. She couldn't have been more than 20, but her eyes were older than that, eyes that had learned not to expect rescue. Elias rested one hand on the fence rail, the other near his hip out of habit. 52 years on the frontier taught a man that trouble didn't always announce itself with gunfire. Sometimes it came quiet, shaking, crying. "You lost?" he asked gently. She flinched at the sound of his voice, then shook her head too fast. "No, sir, I just needed to be somewhere he wouldn't follow." That word, follow, settled wrong in his chest. Elias glanced back toward the long dirt road that cut through sage and scrub like a scar. Empty, wind only, but fear had a way of lingering even when the danger wasn't visible. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she swallowed. "Clara Whitcomb." The name hit him like a fist. Whitcomb. Everyone in 3 counties knew the Whitcombs. Big spread east of the river. Old money, old blood. Her father, Henry Whitcomb, was a man people tipped their hats to even when they hated him. A man who donated to churches, paid judges dinners, and smiled like he owned the future. Elias straightened slowly. "What brings a Whitcomb girl onto my land?" he asked. That's when she broke. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the fence to keep from collapsing. The sob tore out of her like something ripped loose from deep inside. "My father sneaks in every night," she cried. The words echoed across the pasture, swallowed by the wind but not by Elias's ears. He felt the world tilt. "Into where?" he asked carefully. "Into my house," she said, her voice shaking. "Into the rooms I lock. Into places he shouldn't be." Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I moved out," Clara rushed on, as if afraid silence might undo her courage. "I took a small place near the creek. I changed the locks. I barred the windows. And still, every night, something opens. Something moves. He leaves things behind so I'll know he was there." Her hands trembled as she opened her satchel and pulled out a small object. A brass button. Elias recognized it instantly. Whitcomb ranch coat. Custom made. Expensive. "He wants me afraid," she whispered. "And I am." The sun slipped lower, shadows stretching long across the land. Elias felt a familiar cold settle in his bones, the same one he'd felt years ago when men with smiles did terrible things and trusted no one would stop them. "Why come to me?" he asked. Clara looked up at him, eyes red but steady now. "Because you're the only man my father ever failed to buy." That was true. Henry Whitcomb had tried once. Offered Elias money to sell his land, to bend a fence line, to stay quiet about a water dispute. Elias had said no. Henry hadn't smiled at him since. "Has he hurt you?" Elias asked. "No," she said quickly. "Not like that, not yet." Her voice dropped. "But he wants control. He wants to remind me I never really left." Elias exhaled slowly. Frontier justice wasn't written in books. It lived in choices men made when law failed, or when law served the wrong people. "You stay here tonight," he said. Her eyes widened. "I couldn't." "You can," he cut in, firm but calm. "My bunkhouse is empty. Doors are solid, and I don't let men sneak onto my land." She hesitated only a second before nodding. Inside the ranch house, lamplight warmed the rough-hewn walls. Elias poured coffee with steady hands while Clara sat stiffly at the table, as if afraid to touch anything. "Has anyone else seen him?" Elias asked. She shook her head. "He's careful. Always has been." Elias knew the type. Men who built reputations like armor. Men who believed blood gave them ownership. That night, long after Clara had been shown to the bunkhouse, Elias didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, listening to the land breathe. Crickets, wind, the distant lowing of cattle. Then, just past midnight, he heard it. A footstep where no footstep belonged. A shadow moving against the fence line. Slow, confident, as if the man walking believed the land would part for him. Elias rose silently. The moon slid out from behind a cloud, and there, clear as judgment, stood Henry Whitcomb. Hat low, coat buttoned, eyes fixed on the bunkhouse. Not a man searching, a man claiming. Elias felt something inside him harden. He stepped forward, boots crunching deliberately on gravel. Henry froze. Their eyes met across the darkness. Years of bad blood, power, and unspoken threats hanging between them. Looking for something, Elias called. Henry's smile was thin, calculated. Evening, Mercer. I believe my daughter is trespassing. She asked for protection, Elias replied. And she has it. Henry's gaze sharpened. You don't want to involve yourself in family matters. Elias lifted his rifle. Not aimed, but visible. On my land, he said quietly, there are no family matters. Only right and wrong. The wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the weight of a decision that would change all their lives. And in that moment, as Henry Whitcomb turned and walked away, slow, unafraid, Elias Mercer knew something with absolute clarity. Morning came slow and gray, like the land itself was reluctant to wake. Elias Mercer stood at the pump behind the ranch house, working the handle with steady rhythm as cold water splashed into the trough. He hadn't slept. Every creak of wood, every sigh of wind had kept him half awake, listening for boots in the dark that never came. But the memory of them did. Henry Whitcomb's silhouette, unhurried, entitled, was burned into Elias's mind. Not a man who feared being caught. A man who assumed permission. That was what unsettled him most. Clara emerged from the bunkhouse just after dawn, wrapped in a borrowed coat that hung heavy on her narrow shoulders. She paused when she saw Elias, as if unsure whether she was still welcome in the daylight. You sleep? Elias asked. A little, she said. Then softer, for the first time in weeks. He nodded, pretending to focus on the pump. He came, her face drained of color. Here, didn't cross the fence, Elias said. But he meant to. Clara closed her eyes, a shudder passing through her. Then he'll come again. Yes, Elias agreed. He will. They ate breakfast in near silence. The ticking of the clock sounded too loud. Outside, ranch hands moved about their chores, unaware that something invisible and dangerous had already settled over the land. Finally, Elias set his cup down. You need to understand something, he said. What your father's doing isn't just wrong, it's deliberate. He's testing boundaries, seeing who'll stop him. She looked up. No one ever has. Elias studied her closely. That ends now. The unthinkable decision. By mid-morning, Elias had made up his mind. It wasn't the kind of decision a man discussed over coffee or announced with raised voices. It was quieter than that. Heavy. Final. He saddled his horse and rode east, toward the river, toward the Whitcomb ranch. Clara watched from the porch, fear written plain on her face. You're going to confront him. I'm going to warn him, Elias said. And make sure he understands the warning. What if he lies? She asked. Then I'll already know, Elias replied. The Whitcomb place rose out of the land like a fortress, wide. Fences, manicured fields, whitewashed buildings that gleamed with money and maintenance. Men like Henry Whitcomb didn't just own land. They curated it, the way they curated reputations. Henry was waiting on the porch as if he'd known Elias would come. That, too, told Elias everything. You've got nerve, Henry said, smiling thinly. Riding in unannounced. You were on my land last night, Elias replied, not dismounting. Henry spread his hands. I was looking for my daughter. She doesn't want to be found. She doesn't know what she wants, Henry said easily. She's confused. Elias leaned forward in the saddle. She's afraid. Henry's smile faltered. Just for a breath. Afraid of what? You. The word landed hard. Henry's eyes cooled. Careful, Mercer. Accusations like that can ruin a man. So can the truth, Elias said. For a moment, neither spoke. Wind rustled through cottonwoods near the river. Somewhere, a gate creaked. You think you're her savior? Henry finally asked. You think sheltering her makes you righteous? No, Elias said. It makes me responsible. Henry stepped closer. She belongs with her family. She belongs where she's safe. Henry laughed softly. You don't get to decide that. Elias met his gaze without blinking. On my land, I do. Henry's expression hardened. You'll regret this. Maybe, Elias said, but not as much as you will if you cross that fence again. He turned his horse and rode away without waiting for a reply. Behind him, Henry Whitcomb stood very still. The trap is set. By afternoon, Elias had done something that went against every instinct he had as a private man. He sent word, not to the sheriff, who owed Henry favors, but to men who understood quiet justice. Ranchers along the valley, a former deputy who'd left the badge when politics turned sour, a preacher who'd once buried a girl whose screams no one believed. He didn't tell them everything. He didn't need to. By nightfall, the land itself seemed to hold its breath. Clara noticed it first. "It's too quiet," she said. "That's because he's watching," Elias replied. "From where?" "Everywhere." Elias made another unthinkable choice. He didn't lock the bunkhouse. He didn't hide Clara. He left the lamps low, the doors barred just enough to look careless. He positioned himself where shadows would break his outline, rifle close, heart steady. This wasn't about catching Henry in the act. This was about witnesses. Midnight crept in slow and silent. Then, movement. A figure slipped through the fence line this time. No hesitation. No caution. Henry Whitcomb moved like a man who'd done this before. Elias felt rage rise, but he held it down. Henry reached the bunkhouse door and stopped. Something was wrong. Too quiet. Then lanterns flared to life. Men stepped out of the darkness. 3, 4, 5, forming a half circle. Not aiming weapons. Not shouting. Watching. Henry turned slowly, his face pale in the sudden light. "This is a misunderstanding," he said sharply. "No," Elias replied, stepping forward. "This is an ending. You think a handful of men can ruin me?" Henry snapped. "I'll have you all arrested." "By who?" Elias asked calmly. "The sheriff who drinks at your table? Or the judge who hunts on your land?" Henry's mouth opened, then closed. Clara stepped into the lantern light. For the first time, Henry looked afraid. "You came again," she said quietly. "After I told you to stop." "I'm your father," he said, desperation creeping in. "I have rights." "You had responsibilities," she replied. "You broke them." The men said nothing. They didn't need to. Witnesses didn't argue. Henry backed away, eyes darting, calculating. "This isn't over." "It is," Elias said. "Because tomorrow, these men will talk. And the next day, more will listen." "You'll destroy my name," Henry hissed. "You did that yourself," Elias replied. Henry fled into the darkness, pride shattered, power suddenly fragile. Aftermath. The night didn't end with gunfire. It ended with something worse for a man like Henry Whitcomb. Exposure. By dawn, word was already spreading, quietly, carefully, but relentlessly. Ranches closed ranks. Doors shut to Henry. Invitations vanished. The law didn't come for him. But the land did. Clara stood beside Elias on the porch as the sun rose. "What happens now?" she asked. Elias looked out over the fields he'd fought to keep honest. "Now you decide who you are, without fear." She nodded, tears in her eyes, but her shoulders were straight. And Elias Mercer knew he'd crossed a line no map could show. But it was the right one.